Welcome back, everybody. Local environmentalists have welcomed the announcement that South Africa has secured nearly 130 billion rand in funding to help the country transition from coal energy and rehabilitate coal mining communities. US President Joe Biden announced during the week that America, Britain, France, Germany and the European Union have joined to help South Africa finance a just transition to renewable energy. Environmental groups, however, have warned that it's not enough for government to simply talk the talk.
By closing South Africa's coal plants ahead of schedule and investing in clean power alternatives for the people of South Africa and supporting an equitable, inclusive transition in South Africa's coal sector, we're following through on the pledge the G7 partners made in Cornwall to accelerate the transition away from coal in developing countries.
The announcement made at the COP26 summit in Glasgow, Scotland, sets the stage for Africa's biggest carbon emitter to receive 130 billion rands from 25 developed nations and banks at the end of 2022.
I can remember growing up as a young man in an area that was a heavy supplier of coal in northeast Pennsylvania. And I watched what happened when it collapsed and how the impact on the community. And that's why we have to take care of the people who are impacted on.
Speaking to the SABC at the climate change talks, the Presidential Climate Commission emphasized that the transition to green energy needs to be fair and equitable.
It is not simply the country accepting that we need to move away over a period of time from coal. We are also adamant that this must be done in a manner that is just, that requires a lot of attention to be paid to workers who might find their jobs at risk, to communities around both power stations and coal mines.
Local environmentalists, though, say government officials need to be held accountable for ensuring that all the objectives are properly met.
Not only is this deal a big announcement for the climate, but it's also a big announcement for South Africa to be able to tackle our energy crisis. At the heart of the load shedding energy crisis is a lack of sufficient supply of energy as our aging, unreliable and polluting coal fleet is unable to give us the energy that we need.
The Green Connection says not enough details on the deal have emerged.
Definitely not sufficient funding, but it could be a really good start to making South Africa sustainable and stopping load shedding. Having said that, there are a number of questions and concerns that we have regarding this money. Firstly, will this money be in the form of concessional grants or will it be loans that we have to pay back?
If corruption comes into play and this money does not reach the people that needs the money the most, while the energy the most, it will be disastrous, mainly because we're already suffering from energy poverty within this country, and this types of deal can actually help us assist us in actually providing energy for the poorer communities.
The deal is aimed at accelerating South Africa's investments to renewables, as well as protecting coal workers and communities. But concerns have been raised by environmental groups on whether South African government officials will be able to use the funds effectively, transparently and honestly. Nozintombi Mia, SABC News, Johannesburg.
South Africa will receive $8.5 billion to help end its reliance on coal in a deal announced at the COP26 Climate Summit this week. Is this good news for a South Africa that's already struggling to keep the lights on? Well, our COP26 interview tonight is with Power for All CEO Kristina Skierka. Power for All is a global campaign with over 250 partners around the world, uniquely focused on accelerating the end of energy poverty. Now, this campaign has collaborated with utilities like Eskom in countries like Uganda, India and Nigeria to introduce a more decentralized clean energy supply. Kristina joins us now live from Glasgow, where the COP26 summit is underway. Well, Kristina, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to the Globe on SABC News. Thanks indeed for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
As I've mentioned, South Africa has been unable to keep its lights on for some years now, well, to be quite specific, for about 13 years now. And they've introduced rolling blackouts called load shedding here in South Africa. Why has it taken governments like South Africa to admit that centralized coal power supply is definitely not sustainable?
Well, I certainly think all governments probably have their own perspective on that. But look, at the end of the day, it's the incumbent energy source, and a whole distribution system has been built up against it. But having said that, I also think, without a doubt, one of the great things we're seeing at COP26 is a huge upswell of support and advocacy for renewable energy, especially in this day and age where there's good jobs, great jobs, in fact, and good paying jobs, and also just an ease of supply in many cases with things like decentralized renewables energy to really bring energy to the energy poor.
Well, I've spoken to quite a number of climate activists, and they all spoke with one voice with regards to, the lack of meaningful action by the stakeholders, in particular the governments of the world. They all agree that there is always jargon, there is always rhetoric, but no meaningful action on the ground. How important is the political will then to transform energy? What's been your approach to government in countries where you collaborated with utilities like South Africa's Eskom?
Well, and just to correct that, we haven't actually worked with Eskom. I think the idea was like that. So, for example, Umame is one of our great partners in Uganda. But specifically, on the question of political will, it's essential. At the end of the day, that's essentially what all of us are trying to do, whether we're at a negotiating table or whether we're marching in the streets, is to create that political will on accountability to achieve these targets that the world has already agreed to. So among the sort of tactics that you're seeing at COP26, there's a whole bunch of things that we do as Power for All on a regular basis. We really try to focus on countries that we call the low energy access countries. So countries where 50% or less of the population who has access to power. And in those countries, it's been so important to really raise awareness of the effectiveness and the affordability of decentralized renewable energy like rooftop solar and mini grids. And in addition, I guess I would say advocacy takes all shape and form. And we might not even have a sense at this point of the real outcomes of COP26. It's only halfway through, right? And so there might still be a chance to turn around those negative opinions. And I think that's great accountability to hold these leaders to.
Yeah. Kristina, I want us to talk about South Africa's access to the recently announced $8.5 billion fund. Is this in the form of a grant or a loan? How do campaigns like Power for All come in when there's funding for something that you're advocating for?
Yeah, so Power for All is a 501c3 U.S.-based nonprofit, and we have a global team that works all over the world. So our focus is really on trying to gather the sort of concessional funding or foundation and grant money to support this public good, which is universal energy access. So that's really our approach. We may or may not, but probably not, interact with a stream like that. But what's important, I think, is by having that sort of additional money that comes from foundations or individual donors who support the cause of Power for All, is that chance to drive a perspective that's unique in the world and to keep pushing and to that point, activate markets. So a lot of times what we see is that once that political will is established, and how you establish that has to do with really driving awareness and bringing evidence-based advocacy to the fore that helps people understand the kind of development outcomes possible with renewable energy, then that takes us down the road of where we need to be, which is building markets, which is helping turn on the power of the private sector to end energy poverty faster.
Now, Power for All has just released a census that says, renewable energy can create jobs, especially in the rural areas of the world where people live without power. So, those are the areas with high unemployment and mostly, with no power at all. Why do you see this as an opportunity?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And we're actually releasing some early insights. It's not quite yet the full report, but that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow at COP. And it is an opportunity. And so we already know some basic things about renewable energy, right? So one is that it's a growing industry. This last year alone, according to IRENA, there's 12 million jobs in the renewable energy sector. And beyond that, one of the things that we care about is how women are treated in this whole dynamic. And while we still could do better in the renewable space, it's actually a much better ratio of women to men in renewable energy. But I guess what I would say about our specific focus on decentralized renewable energy is that it brings jobs to where they're needed most. So the same people who are most vulnerable from lack of access to energy are often the same people who are perfect to help drive this sector, whether it's as sales agents or installers or other jobs like that. It's just a huge opportunity. And beyond that, not only is decentralized renewables a great source for jobs, but it can also be a great source for resilience in existing energy grids. And that's one of those things that we want to keep talking about more and more, is how renewable energy can help support the existing system while, having to avoid path dependency.
Now, Kristina, I understand that you'll be moderating a panel discussion on Monday on jobs creation in the renewable energy sector. What kind of support are you looking for to make these jobs happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the sector needs a couple of different things. And in particular, this sector to thrive needs for it to be easier to do renewable energy business, right? And so that can take the form of a number of things. It can include energy policies that take carve-outs, actually call out the specifics of where decentralized renewables will help add to the energy mix. The other things that can be done are things like reducing import taxes to help get renewable products and services into the countries faster. But in addition, for me, the biggest concern really comes down to creating the talent pipeline this sector needs to be successful. So I do think that there is room for partnership and collaboration, both at a government level, but at a university and academic level, where we're actually teaching what renewables are about and how to get into the sector and to drive that interest. And it doesn't just stick to the academic level, also TVET. So it's very much a vocational and training sort of category as well. And from our perspective, the more that a country commits to accelerating the end of energy poverty, the bigger opportunity is for a market and therefore also for jobs for locals.
Yeah, and speaking of jobs for locals, you've been recently in a panel discussing women's empowerment in the renewables, renewable sector. Just how wide is the gap between, men's and women's representation and participation in this particular sector, Kristina?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I've been in the energy sector for about 20 years. So I've kind of seen a lot in terms of being a woman in the energy space. And I guess what I say is, first of all, I think we all know that women were very much disproportionately affected by COVID, and regardless of country and regardless of profession at the end of the day. And so it's really clear that women lost more jobs. But I guess what I would say is that it's still not the right ratio. It's something like 3-to-1 men to women in general in the sector, and that's something that needs to change. And now some of that's culturally based, but a lot of it also has to do with just habit. And how do we encourage women in the same way with STEM education programs and whatnot? We need to make a concerted effort to get more women in this field, and specifically more female founders.
I know that, getting countries to commit to these climate protocols has been a thorny issue for years now. I want us to talk about, the country commitment to these protocols. Amongst the list of its demands, the COP26 coalition wants countries to uphold their commitment to keep global warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. They're also asking for no new investments in fossil fuels or, fuel-related infrastructure. So as an advocate for renewable energy, how are you helping to see that these countries deliver on their promises?
Well, I think the same way all the other advocates are. I mean, there was 100,000 people marching in the streets here in Glasgow, right? And so it's being very public about commitments made. And at the same time, yeah, it's important to point out when those commitments fall down. It's also really important to celebrate success. And there's a number of countries doing great stuff out there to bring more and more renewables online. So at the same time, I know there's a lot of discontent, and I completely get that. There's also good work being done, and we need to be able to talk about and hold up both, and therefore provide that global accountability.
All right, Kristina, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
All right, that was Kristina Skierka. Well, she's a CEO for Power for All, which is a global campaign with over 250 partners around the world, uniquely focused on accelerating the end of energy poverty. She was speaking to us live via Zoom. Well, this is The Globe and SABC News. Let's take another break. We'll be back with more news in a moment.